Welcome, welcome. We are today going to begin talking about our first existentialist, or perhaps often called the first existentialist, one Soren Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard lived from 1813 to 1855. As you see, he did not live a long life at all. He was a deeply troubled person. Let me see. He lived an anguished life. He had a troubled devotion to his father, a broken engagement about which many have written it was an ugly sort of thing. He had squabbles with tabloid papers and a flurry of pamphlets aimed at a church so secure in its establishment that it didn't bother to respond. Daily he struggled with and renewed the anguish that was his life. Kierkegaard was concerned with the immediate. All of his writings lament an immediacy hopelessly lost in reflection. His vision of Christian consummation is a miraculous and reintegration into a new immediacy, a contemporaneity with self possible only by virtue of the absurd. Let's talk about this immediacy for a minute. It's a notion he picked up from some of his philosophical influences, primarily Hegel, an early 19th century German philosopher. Generally, immediacy is equated with direct experience as it is had before the onset of reflection. Okay? Sensation and feeling are immediate right now, as opposed to thought, which requires you to stop and think about that past. Remember Hume? First impressions are immediate as opposed to second. So you meet someone right away, you get that first impression, and later you think about it, you go, oh no, so that's mediated. Life as it is before it doubles back on itself in the mediation of self-consciousness. This is immediate existence. So immediate existence is the immediate, in the moment encounter of something. Mediated experience is that which is mediated by thought, which you think about. Okay? Now, another important idea for Descartes, we're going to tie these together here in just a minute, is the aesthetic. Kierkegaard, traditionally, this has come to be associated with beauty and the fine arts. But Kierkegaard wants to go back to the root meaning, which is sense perception, believe it or not. He defines what he calls the aesthetic as a dimension of existence as an overall design for living by means of the immediate. Okay? The aesthetic in a man is that by which he immediately is what he is. If we could discover what human nature is, then we could catch ourselves in our immediacy. We would understand exactly what Kierkegaard means by the aesthetic. But this notion of immediacy is going to be important to this essay we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. So let's get back to this immediacy again. The difficulty with immediacy is that it never is where it's asked about. Okay? Asking about immediacy is already an act of reflection once removed from the immediate. Okay, this moment we're having right now, we can't know anything about it. We can't say anything about it in its immediacy, because to do that, it requires that minute to be gone. Now it's gone, because you can't catch the present, right? So to ask about immediacy is to not be talking about immediate anymore. This moment right now, this immediacy, let's capture this moment, let's talk about it. No, if you talk about it, it's no longer immediate. Okay? Just as we can never look ourselves in the eye, so immediacy cannot be gotten at directly, for it is directly had. Now, Kierkegaard's struggle is to get back to the immediate experience of Christianity and to say that this is the only authentic form of it. Christendom, according to Kierkegaard, has killed God in fact by killing the immediacy of the experience with all of its rituals, creeds, and trappings, they have just made this all so very routine, and they kill the immediacy of the Christ encounter. Okay? Now, with this in mind, we're going to get to this essay that is posted on the Moodle under the readings. It's called Truth is Subjectivity, and I'm going to highly recommend that you pause this if you haven't done so already and print a copy of it. Because the best way to do this, we're going to be doing a close text reading, is to mark it up and take your notes right there on the copy. Or if you have a tablet, you can write on wherever you can do that, however your technology works. But we're going to be looking at a lot of this text. Okay? All right. We're going to start with the opening paragraph. Truth is subjectivity. Not that whole one, but just the first part of it. Our treatment of the problem does not raise the question of the truth of Christianity. It merely deals with the question of the individual's relationship to Christianity. It has nothing whatever to do with the systematic zeal of the personally indifferent individual to arrange the truths of Christianity in paragraphs. It deals with the concerns of the individual, infinitely interested individual for his own relationship to such a doctrine. To put it as simply as possible, using myself by way of illustration, I, Johann Climacus, born in the city and now 30 years old, a common, ordinary human being like most people, assume there awaits me a highest good and eternal happiness in the same sense that such a good awaits a servant girl or a professor. I've heard that Christianity proposes itself as a condition for the requirement of this good, and now I ask, how may I establish a proper relationship to this doctrine? Notice this. Okay, there's a couple of things to point out here. First of all, the pseudonym, he's writing under the name Johannes Climacus. And so this is to give the illusion of a dialogue going on about this. He's also interested in he's not raising the question of the truth of Christianity. Okay, that's not his question. His question is, how may I establish a proper relationship to this doctrine? That's the most important question. Okay, now this leads us to a question then, a distinction that he's going to make. We're going to go to the next page for that, between the objective question and the subjective question. Okay? Looking at page 112, he begins to talk mainly about the objective question there. Let's look at that last paragraph of that section. The objective problem consists of an inquiry into the truth of Christianity. Okay? The subjective problem concerns the relationship of the individual to Christianity. Notice the difference there. The objective question, is this true? The subjective question, is my relationship to that truthful? Important. How may I, Johann Climacus, participate in the happiness promised by Christianity? The problem concerns myself alone, partly because if it is properly posed, it will concern everyone else in the same manner, and partly because all the others already have faith in something given, as a triviality of little value, or as a triviality which amounts to something only when tricked out with a few proofs. So the posing of the problem cannot be regarded as a presumption on my part, but only as a special kind of madness. Again, the objective question asks, is it true? The subjective question asks of the nature of my relationship. Is it truthful? Okay? In the next paragraph, he is going to begin referring to something called approximation. Okay? And the method, the approximation process, is the method used for the objective question. That is, when you ask, is this thing true? Is this belief true? You begin then with the objective question. In other words, you're not asking about your relationship. Look at that, the paragraph in the next section right there. When Christianity is viewed from the standpoint of its historical documentation, it becomes necessary to secure an entirely trustworthy account of what the Christian doctrine really is. That's what the objective question is. If the inquirer were infinitely interested in behalf of his relationship to the doctrine, he would at once despair. Okay, that is, for the person who's infinitely interested, the method of approximation, or the approximation process, that's not it. Okay, for nothing is more readily evident than the greatest attainable certainty with respect to anything historical is merely an approximation. Okay, asking about something historical, you gather evidence, you gather evidence, you gather evidence. Maybe you can get close to it, but you can never know that you've gotten it. That is, anything historically is necessarily an approximation because you can never know that you're finally there. Okay? An approximation, when viewed as a basis for eternal happiness, is wholly inadequate. But the interest of the inquiring subject being merely historical, okay, since the incommensurability makes the result impossible. But the interest of the inquiring subject being merely historical, whether he also has an infinite interest in Christianity's capacity as a believer, in which case the whole enterprise might readily come to involve him in several contradictions, or whether he stands aloof, whether any passionate decision, negative decision, qua unbeliever. So the interest of the inquiring subject being merely historical, he brings upon himself the tremendous task of research, adding new contributions of his own, and continuing thus until his 70th year. Just 2 weeks before his death, he looks forward to the publication of a new book, and his hope will throw light upon one side of the entire inquiry. Such an objective temper is an epigram, unless its antithesis by an epigram over it, over the restless concern of the infinitely interested subject, who surely needs to have such a question answered, related as it is to his eternal happiness. In any case, he will not, upon any consideration, dare to relinquish his interest until the last minute. He continues on in this vein on that page with what I sometimes call the parody of the scholar, right? The example he uses is talk about philological scholarship here, right? That's what those linguist people do with trying to get those ancient texts all in proper order, right? And for example, he's got one of Cicero's writings, for example, and he gets everything in order with the text. Okay? What results from this? Well, nothing follows except the wholly admirable result that an ancient writing has now, through its skill and competence, received its most accurate possible form. Well, there's a sense in which that can be important. Sure, that's interesting and all. But, continuing from there, but by no means that I should now base my eternal happiness on this work. That's towards the bottom of that first page, of page 113, right? For in relation to my eternal happiness, his astonishing acumen seems, I must admit, inadequate. I confess that my admiration for him would not be glad but despondent if I thought any such thing would have in mind. But this is precisely how the learned theologian goes to work. And when he has completed his task, he draws his conclusion. Ergo, now you can base your eternal happiness upon these writings. Okay, so suppose that we have, turn the page, everything, the scriptures, we have the scriptures completely in order, we have their most accurate presentation possible. What results from this? In that penultimate paragraph, that section before that break, right in the middle of 114, he points out, look, what follows from having the scriptures in order? Not a thing, except that's what you have. No one who previously had faith is brought one step closer to faith just because you have the accurate account. Why? Because faith does not result simply from a scientific inquiry. It does not come directly at all. Okay? So the learned theologian has to have this, wants to have this certainty, wants to have this proof. Who needs proof? Okay? Faith does not need proof. In fact, he says, it must even regard the proof as its enemy. Faith must regard proof as its enemy. Interesting. Now, I've reproduced the italicized part of that next paragraph there because this is kind of the core of the issue here, and it's a bit difficult. Okay? But we're going to sort this out. When the question of truth is raised in an objective manner, reflection is directed objectively to the truth as an object to which the knower is related. Reflection is not focused upon the relationship, however, but upon the question of whether it is the truth to which the knower is related. Okay, let me pause right there. When we ask the objective question, we're asking, is this thing that you're seeking for, that you're believing? You're asking, is that thing in fact true? Okay? But you're not focused there upon your relationship to it, only whether or not that thing is true. Okay? If only the object to which he's related is the truth, the subject's accounted to be in the truth, in the objective part. So when you ask the objective question, only if the thing that you're investigating in turns out to be actually true are you said to be in truth. Okay? On the other hand, when the question of the truth is raised subjectively, reflection is directed subjectively to the nature of the individual's relationship. If only the mode of this relationship is in the truth, the individual is in the truth, even if he should happen to be related to what is not true. Okay, with a subjective question, you're asking about your relationship to that truth. If your relationship is truthful, then you're in the truth, even if that thing you're related to happens to not be objectively so. Really? Okay. So, for example, take the knowledge of God. Objectively, the problem is whether or not this object is the true God. Subjectively, the question is whether the individual is related to a something in such a manner that his relationship is in truth a God relationship. Now, on which side is the highest truth to be found? For Kierkegaard, that is on the subjective side. Okay? Middle paragraph on 115. The existing individual who chooses to pursue the objective way enters upon the entire approximation process by which is proposed to bring God to light objectively. But this is all entirely impossible because God is a subject and therefore exists only for subjectivity and inwardness. Interesting. So, one of the implications of this is illustrated in that quotation that's on the screen right there. Okay? And that's just that next paragraph of 115. Right? So, say you live in the midst of Christendom. Okay? And you go up to the house of God, the true God. But you have a true conception of God, but you pray in a false spirit. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, suppose someone who lives in an idolatrous community and prays with the entire passion of the infinite, though his eyes rest on the image of an idol. Where's the most truth? The one prays to God in truth, though he worships an idol. The other prays falsely to the true God, and hence worships, in fact, an idol. The former is the one who lives in the idolatrous community. The latter is the one who lives in the Christendom. Okay, supposedly. In other words, there is more truth in worshiping a false God truly than there is in worshiping the true God falsely. I want us to talk about this when we meet. Okay? There's more truth in worshiping a false God truly than there is in worshiping the true God falsely. Think about that for a minute. When we investigate the objective problem of, and he applies this to immortality, right? So suppose that someone approaches it in the objective fashion, okay? And another embraces the uncertainty with the passion of the infinite. Where's the truth? Who has the greater uncertainty? Who has the greater certainty? So he uses the example here of Socrates, who's facing his death, right? Remember Socrates from back a long time ago, right? he puts the question objectively in a problematic manner. If there isn't immortality. So he is a doubter in comparison with some, but by no means. But you know what? He still faces his death with great courage. Okay? What better proof of immortality could you have? He didn't fear dying at all. Okay? Now, we're going to come back to Socrates maybe in a few minutes here because he does later on in the essay. Notice this then. The objective accent falls on what is said. The subjective accent falls on how it is said. When we ask the what question, that is the approximation process. Is this true objectively? The subjective accent asks about my relationship to it. How is this done? That's the how. And for Kierkegaard, that's where the most truth is found. Now, truth is then, and by the way, this looks like a good test question right here, an objective uncertainty held fast in appropriation process of the most passionate inwardness. That is truth. Okay? He goes on to point out that this definition of truth is an equivalent expression for faith. Without risk, there is no faith. Faith is precisely the contradiction between the infinite passion of the individual's inwardness and the objective uncertainty. Now, we're going to explore this a bit deeper here, just this next section. This is important. Okay? So notice this. The greater the risk, the greater the possible faith. The more objective security, the less the inwardness. And the less objective security, the more profound the possible inwardness. The more objective certainty you have, faith becomes impossible or less possible. Only when you have a great uncertainty does faith become possible. Okay? Now, the ultimate way to do this is the paradox. Is paradoxical. Okay? Now, notice this then. The absurd is the greatest objective uncertainty. On 118, in that middle paragraph right there, you have to stop right there. What now is the absurd? The absurd is that the eternal truth has come into being in time. That God has come into being, should be into right there, has been born, has grown up, and so forth, precisely like any other individual human being, quite indistinguishable from other individuals. Okay, Kierkegaard really appreciates the absurdity, the utter absurdity of the incarnation. In Christian theology, we have made this, I say we because I count myself amongst them, right? We've put all this in great formulas. We have the Trinity, we have all this can be diagrammed and rationalized and all that. Kierkegaard says, no. That the infinite, the eternal light becomes finite. That's ridiculous. It's absurd. Okay? It shouldn't be possible. How? How can the infinite light, the ground of all being, become just a measly person? That's absurd. Yet, it is in virtue of the absurd that truth can be found. Okay? The eternal truth, then, is itself a paradox. Look at that last full paragraph, 118. Suppose a man who wishes to acquire faith. Let the comedy begin. He wishes to have faith, but he wishes also to safeguard himself by means of an objective inquiry and its approximation process. What happens? With the help of the approximation process, the absurd becomes something different. It becomes probable. It becomes increasingly probable. It becomes extremely and emphatically probable. Okay? Now, think about that. As Christianity has become more and more rationalized, we make the notion of the incarnation such a reasonable thing. It all becomes very, very easy. It becomes probable, emphatically probable. Going on. Now he's ready to believe it, and he ventures to claim for himself that he does not believe as shoemakers and tailors and simple folk believe, but only after long deliberation. Now he's ready to believe it, and lo, now it's become precisely impossible to believe it. Anything that's almost probable or extremely emphatically probable is something he can almost know, or as good as know, or extremely emphatically know, but is impossible to believe. For the absurd is the object of faith, and the only object that can be believed. When you make it entirely and perfectly reasonable, it becomes impossible to believe it and to have faith, because faith and belief is in the absurd. Okay? So when someone wants to speculate about the objective faith, this is speculation over a sum of doctrinal propositions, over a set of them, right? But suppose Christianity is nothing of the kind. Suppose it is inwardness. Hence the paradox. The middle of that last paragraph on 19 that goes over to 120. Right in the middle of that paragraph. But suppose Christianity were nothing of the kind. Suppose, on the contrary, it were inwardness, and hence also the paradox, so as to thrust the individual away objectively in order to obtain significance for the existing individual and the inwardness of his existence, in order to place him as decisively as no judge can place an accused person. Between time and eternity and time, between heaven and hell and the time of salvation, the objective faith, as if Christianity had been promulgated as a little system, if not quite so good as Hegelian, as if as Christ, if I speak without offense, as if Christ were a professor. He wasn't. And if the apostles formed some little scientific society, verily, if it was once difficult to become a Christian, now I believe it becomes increasingly difficult year by year, because it's now become so easy that the only ambition which stirs any competition is that becoming a speculative philosopher. And yet, speculative philosophers perhaps the farthest possible removed from Christianity. And it's perhaps far preferable to be an offended individual who nevertheless sustains a relation to Christianity than a speculative philosopher who assumes to have understood it. So the person who claims to understand it, you're better off being the person who is offended, who wants to recognize the absurdity of it all. Insofar as there is hope that there will be some resemblance left between a Christian now and the earliest days, so it will again be regarded as folly for anyone to entertain the notion of becoming a Christian. In the earliest days, the Christian was a fool in the eyes of the world, and to Jews and pagans alike, it seemed folly for anyone to seek to become one. That was a nutty idea back then. Now we are Christians as a matter of course. But if anyone desires to be a Christian with infinite passion, he is judged to be a fool. When you're a Kierkegaardian-style Christian, you're a fool. Just as always folly to put an infinite passionate exertion for the sake of becoming what one already is. Why would you go through that when it's easy to become a Christian? Just go to church and move with the proper motions and take communion, do all those things. That's all you got to do. As if a man were to sacrifice all his wealth to buy a jewel which he already owned. Formerly, a Christian was a fool in the eyes of the world. Now that all men are Christian, he nevertheless becomes a fool in the eyes of Christians. For Kierkegaard, Christianity became easy, thus it ceased to be Christianity. He's trying to recover that immediacy, and that goes back to what we did at the beginning. Now, for your assignment. For this one, I have that quotation from page 115 that we looked at about someone who worships, goes up the house of the true God and prays the false spirit versus the one who goes to the house of an idol yet prays with a true spirit. Where's the most truth? Just to try to see how you're getting Kierkegaard to explain how this follows from his notion of truth. Okay? And then I want you to tell me, does this observation on that quotation right there, does that seem correct to you? Why or why not? All right? See you next time.